Welcome to the Magnalia podcast. Jordan, Ahshuwah, glad to have you on. Can you guys give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, my name is Jordan Bush. I was a Reformed Baptist church planter and missionary in Uruguay. And now I am the executive director of TGFB Media, which exists to help Christians understand and use Bitcoin for the glory of God and the good of people everywhere.
You memorized that.
It's just
That's
a great,
so impressive.
Wow, that
there
was
we go.
really
So we do.
buttoned up.
Yeah.
My mission statement changes every time I say it.
Yeah.
So I'm Ahshuwah Hawthorne. I live with my family in Portland, Oregon. I've had lots of different hats and identity crises over my years. I've kind of recently come to peace with identity as a missionary entrepreneur, where I try to start things and try to find open doors for the gospel to go to the nations in creative, weird kind of ways. And that's what got me into Bitcoin. And yeah, I lead a small ministry called Brilliance Labs that tries to help other weird founders try to see new ideas come to reality and have an impact to the glory of God.
Awesome. Well, you guys have been doing this longer than us. So why Bitcoin? Why are we in this conversation? Christians, Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, there's literally 100 ways that you could go in this. I think, like, for me, when I first got into Bitcoin, I was just looking for something to invest in, and I didn't know anything about investing. So I'm looking in the regular stock world, and as I'm looking at all these different stocks that you could potentially invest in, I had a family member who said to me, who'd done really well investing, who just said, "Hey, you should just buy Coca-Cola. They give like a dividend. It's a good stock. They're going to be around forever, or whatever." And so I was thinking, okay, but the inner philosophy major in me was just like, so what? I'm going to get to the end of my life and be able to retire comfortably because I made money selling sugar water to poor people. And so I just was like, I don't want to do that.
Magic internet money would be much better.
Well, it is. But like that was part of the thing. I was just like, what do you invest in that doesn't have these negative consequences where you're actually subsidizing things that are either directly hurting people or just aren't things that I personally want to support.
He's an ESG investor. You can hear it.
And so again, that just was, again, I look at the Lord and I'm just grateful because that was an honest thing that I wrestled with, was like, what do I invest in that can actually provide for my family over the long term and honor the things that God tells, fathers and parents that they should care about, without also doing that at the expense of other people and other image bearers of God. So I had that in my mind and heard about Bitcoin, had no idea what it really was. I had bought a little bit in 2017, like $100 worth, but just didn't understand what it was. And so in 2019, I took like a month and just kind of, with my spare time, just really went down the rabbit hole and ended up buying a bunch of it relative to my net worth, which was, as a missionary, not much. And so over the course of the next year, I just started thinking about Bitcoin through the lens of a Christian, because as I'm studying Bitcoin, I'm also pastoring this small church in Uruguay, and half of the church members were Venezuelan immigrants who'd had their purchasing power destroyed by their government. Government new person who's running for president or whatever it is, he promises free stuff in order to get people to vote for him. And how do you fund the free stuff when you don't have the reserve currency of the world? You just print it. And so their currency quickly became worthless. And I just saw firsthand people who I loved, we had a lot of fathers who left their wives and kids in Venezuela and then moved to try to get a job and send money home. And so I just saw the consequences of, firsthand, of this thing that seemed, this money creation that doesn't seem very spiritual, I'd never heard a single thing about it in any of my missions classes or Bible classes or anything, but I just saw firsthand what this really does to people. And then over time found that this has happened over and over again across the world. Currencies have failed multiple times. And so just the more that I saw that happening, and I was thinking about Bitcoin through this lens, and Bitcoin was created to be a money that a government couldn't create more units of. And so the more that I thought, the more I just saw, again, the gospel implications of this, seeing the gospel go out in the world. And so for me, it was a process that I just saw I saw Bitcoin as this, again, timely tool and a timely gift from the Lord in limited capacities to be used to accomplish His purposes. So yeah, again, we could go to 100 different ways, but I think that's one of these things is there's a lot of people who think about Bitcoin, especially Americans who are going to be the ones primarily listening to this, I'm assuming. And their initial thing to think about Bitcoin is through the lens of a speculative investment to get rich quickly. And that's their only framework for it. And that's reinforced by going on, these Fox Business and all these other things. That's the lens through which they're talking about it. But there's 100 other lenses that are very real and much different that Christians and have much more to do with things that Christians are commanded to care about. So that's, again, long roundabout answer. But
Ash, what would you add to that? What's your case to Christians for why they should care about Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I would agree with what Jordan said, and I think that the question of money within the church is often in the area of personal stewardship, personal finance, and your average money sermon, right, will be around, hey, are you being generous? Are you stewarding well what you have? Are you being greedy and loving money? There's great books like Randy Alcorn has like his big book on money, and it's exhaustive and it's helpful. I've read it. I've benefited from it on the personal finance side, and beware of greed and the love of money and then you have like the business people that are like genuinely trying to think about how do you multiply wealth? How do you understand risk and investments and that whole kind of investment world? And usually those aren't the church people, or they're meant to be believers, but they're not the like Bible teacher people. But they're still trying to think through stewardship questions. And Bitcoin goes one step deeper. And so it goes into this question of even the ethics of money production, the philosophical questions of what is money, what has value, how do we value our time, and how do we create units of that value that we will now steward and then deploy into the world for fruitfulness or for destruction. Right, so you go all the way back to the garden, and I know you could wax eloquent on the biblical theology of it, but we're entrusted to take this garden, steward it, protect it, cultivate it, and then look out beyond it and see the wilderness and say, I need to turn the wilderness into garden. I need to be fruitful and multiply. Take what God's given, steward it, and make it fruitful. And so money is an essential part of that calling. It's how we measure the stewardship of what we've been entrusted. And people spend a lot of time, in fact, the vast majority of their working vocational time, trying to make money and produce provision for themselves and their family, maybe accumulate some wealth, but they spend very little time thinking about how do you save it? What do you do with it once it's been earned? And that's kind of left to the 1%, right? That then spend all their time thinking about that. Well, what if there's like a bug in the firmware of the money, and you actually can start fresh, or you need to install some new software? I'm like teeing up to our coder here who can help us understand. Like Bitcoin is actually a different like firmware installed in the monetary system that can take over this Trojan horse or this bug that's now gonna like set things right and fix and create a whole new system that actually is more ethical. And most of us as Christians, when we think about money, we don't want to go there. That's too much information. Like you're getting, I think of the "Just Stop It" sketch of the
Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, the Saturday Night Live counselor, and then she starts going into like, well, I have this father issue. Oh no, we don't go there, right? We have this money issue. We have this like Federal Reserve issue. Oh no, we don't go there, right? We're in church. We're going to talk about like the safe topics. Well, actually, no. You gotta Ron Paul was onto something. Like, let's figure out what's going on behind the scene, and we can actually make a difference there, or actually opt out to it and step into an entirely different system. And that's what Bitcoin is.
I think one other thing that I would mention is like we're in this moment in the United States and a lot of other countries of existential crisis, of like definitional crisis. We don't know what anything is. We don't know what it means to be a man. We don't know what a woman is. We don't know what governments are. There's like all kinds of arguments about should governments do 100 things or 3 things, or like it's an epistemological crisis. How do we even know what governments are and what people are and what churches are? Like, should churches be doing everything? Should churches be, daycare centers? Should they have water slides and all these kind of things, or should they just be more limited? And one of the things that we're all just, there's a lot of argumentation and yelling at each other because we don't agree about these foundational questions. And one of these questions that is just as influential as a lot of these other ones that are obviously influential to Christians, and far-reaching and affect a lot of things, is this question of what is money. And again, I never had a single class on this in Bible college. None of the sermons that I ever heard, partially, which makes sense. It makes sense to a degree. But I never thought about this issue because I never had a reason. I never had, Jesus has this phenomenal quote where he says, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick." And so for me, 37 years old, growing up in the United States, we have the reserve currency of the world. It's again got its issues, but up until recently, it's been miles better, multitudes better than any other thing in the world. And so I didn't feel the pain of the existing monetary system. But through living in my case, living in Uruguay, I saw firsthand people experiencing the consequences of a system that basically facilitates governments and central banks stealing purchasing power from their people through inflation, creating more monetary units. And so the more that I experienced that and saw that, I just realized, wait, this is going to affect the spread of the gospel. This is affecting not just missionaries today. This is affecting the work and the money and all these investment that's been done 50 years ago. We knew churches that have been in a constant state of struggle for 50 years. They've had faithful people. They've had faithful people giving, sacrificially, but they haven't been able to save enough money to buy a building or something like that because, every I guess it's like on average every 13 years the currency fails. And so just seeing this over and over again, I was like, well, what do you really do about this? Like, what do you really do when there's really no other option? People are trying to save. You do have these big churches that they're able to buy real estate or they're able to buy other scarce goods that maintain their value much better than the currency itself. But to your small church plant, your average person who's, a church member working in this context, they can't necessarily latch onto and benefit from those things. And so over the course of 5 years, I've come to see Bitcoin as a tool that can be latched onto and used by all of the above, the small to the large to whatever, in a way that honors and protects their generosity and their hard work in a way that isn't done by fiat currencies. And again, we could get into the history of these things. This is nothing new that we're talking about. This is an age-old thing that we've seen over and over again. This fails over and over again. And again, to our detriment, most Christians, we've never heard about these things. And so
what do you think is the best or the most understandable Christian objection to Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's people, they look at the there's a bunch of them. I think there are ones there's a ton of them that make sense superficially.
You can quote some people. So Al Mohler did a short episode where he mentioned it. What wasn't his main argument? Hey, this is not backed by anything. It doesn't have cash flows or dividends. It's not a real investment.
There's a lot of other people who mentioned like speculation. Is it legitimate or it's illegitimate for Christians to speculate and gamble? They look at buying Bitcoin as gambling.
There's a lot of Bitcoiners that treat Bitcoin like it's Jesus.
Yeah.
And they'll even say that.
Yeah.
On Twitter.
Yes. Bitcoin is God. Some people have said,
Gets a little sketchy.
Yeah. That's less than desirable.
Yeah. But at the same time, just going back to what you said about like going down one level deeper, everybody just wants money that just works. Like you don't have to think about it. They want a government that just works.
Yep.
They want institutions that just work.
Yep.
I feel
churches that just work.
churches that just work.
Yeah.
I think people are more accustomed to governments rolling over, and obviously with the mask coming off during COVID, institutions rolling over, and like people
Yep.
lost trust in that. And so as you go down the rabbit hole, you finally get to, if civilization's kind of the bedrock, money is like one layer on top,
Yep.
like above that, and everything's built on top of that,
Yep.
right? And so I think what happens is as people go down the rabbit hole, become Bitcoiners, and they question everything about money, and they're at that level, then they have these sort of existential crises,
Yep.
right? Where it's like they're questioning everything,
Yep.
and then they're ripe for reimagining what religion might look like,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so this kind of gets to one of the questions you were thinking about earlier of just, we're talking about what's the argument to Christians about Bitcoin? What's the other way around? Like, what is the argument to Bitcoiners about Christ?
Yeah.
They're there.
Yeah.
Like, why are they? You wrote about this, right?
Yeah.
We're going to talk about it
Yeah.
in the next podcast on 21 meditations. But
Yeah. Yeah. What I mean, again, so this is you kind of you were getting there. I think the part of the issue is you have people who take for granted, everyone, all of us take for granted that we understand the world, that we understand, we actually see the world the way that it really is. And one of the things, speaking from the standpoint of if you're trying to think about ministering to Bitcoiners have come to the realization of, holy cow, I didn't even see, it's the David Foster Wallace, the fish is swimming in the water, and he says to the two young fish, hey boys, how's the water today? And the young fish are swimming, and they go, well, what's water? Like they didn't even know that this thing was here. And then once they see the money thing, and they ask this question of what is money, and they start to try to dig down into that, and they see, wait a second, the world works way differently than I anticipated. And I didn't even realize this was here. It's a humbling realization.
it's like you question everything at that point.
Yes, and you start to see the incentives and how, like, the answer to that question of what is money changes the incentives of a whole host of things. But once you come to that and you get to that bottom, it humbles you, and it opens people up, at least in my experience, it opens people up to be willing to consider, all right, what else that seemed patently ridiculous, like it seems so obviously false, that I was utterly wrong about? What else is there out there that's like this? And one of the things that's like this is Christianity and religion more broadly. People they just didn't see how it connected to their, how this question of money connected to their life, and now they can't unsee it. And so now they're willing to consider, wait a second, let me just think about maybe religion from a different standpoint. I thought that this was an obvious thing, that it was ridiculous and patently untrue, and it humbles people. And so I just see this over and over again.
We're in a world of just like moral relativism, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting to see Bitcoin out there as like an objective, absolute truth.
Yes. Yep.
It's like as close as we can get.
Yeah.
That's pretty shocking to most people, right?
Yep.
Because we're pretty used to like, oh yeah, whatever you believe, like you do your truth, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so then it's almost like a magnet that starts attracting other concepts. And obviously we know that Christ is the original objective absolute truth.
Yes. Yep.
The real absolute truth.
Yep.
But Bitcoin sort of can point people in that direction, right?
Yeah. So in Galatians, it talks about the law being a tutor that brings us to Christ, and it does different things, right? It reveals our guilt. We see that, wow, there's this moral standard and this moral good in the world that I agree is good, and I try to attain it, and I cannot. I fail. I need a savior. We see the law actually stir up more rebellion in us of the 3-year-old. Okay, do anything but not that. What? Oh, what is that? And so there's this part of us that rebels against the law and against an objective truth standard. But if you can live apart from God's law and His word, and you kind of surround yourself with a relativistic kind of, I'm going to manifest my destiny, and the universe will just work out, and you live already in a generally peaceful society governed by rule of law, you can really live in a bubble of imaginary hopium of everything's just okay, and truth is relative. And then Bitcoin shows up, and it says, question everything and rethink all your assumptions. And then it says, I was released into the universe. I run a certain code. Code is law, right? It is speech, and it is written, and it is said. And there is consensus that says, if you want to join this network, you have to abide by these rules and these laws. And if you do, and you put part of your life, stewardship, and energy into that, either through mining, actually paying for energy to guard the network and earn the block reward, or by taking your fiat assets and trading them for this digital asset that is the fruit of the working of this and breathing, living network, then you benefit from it. And you are brought into that network. But if you break any of its laws, if you try to send out a transaction that's not according to consensus, if you lose your keys that lock your access to your wallet, if there's any number of things that you do to not play by the rules, you get wrecked, you get broken. And I would say that's analogous to the law. And you face objective reality, and if everything else in your life you thought was relative, and you could live in a little peaceful harmony where there's no like wall that beats against your imaginary worldview of fairies and purple clouds and whatnot. But Bitcoin, it is unforgiving. It does not love you. It has not died for your sins. It is the law of Moses with smoke and fire and the roaring of his glory and his wrath. Like it's a little picture of that, and so I think it shocks people. They experience it and they're like, wow, there's objective reality, and it humbles them. They get wrecked a little bit. They go through one cycle. They get into some scamming things, or they lose their keys, and or they put their money in BlockFi, whatever it is. Yeah. They get wrecked, and they're like, okay, I'm gonna tread lightly in this world.
I think one other thing, which again, people who know me, like Tim Keller, more maligned figure, all right, in the last few years. And again, there's reasons for this, but like at the same time, one of the most valuable things that I ever heard from Tim Keller was he talks about freedom. And he basically like freedom is way more complicated than we think it is. Like than especially secular people like think it is. And so one of the things that happens is you have a lot of the people who initially got into Bitcoin were nerds and radical libertarian. A lot of them were philosophers. They were deeply invested in the cypherpunk ideals, and so they had this idea of just radical, like a commitment to radical freedom. And one of the things that's really interesting is when you get into Bitcoin, you find. Again, they find within Bitcoin, they find like I've benefited monetarily. This thing is secure in all kinds of ways that are shocking. Like you can stand up against nations, like the biggest nations in the world. Bitcoin can stand up against them. And so what you find is freedom comes through submitting yourself to the rules of how Bitcoin works. So freedom is not, to quote Keller, paraphrasing him, like it's not, you don't find freedom by getting rid of any constraint, but it's by submitting yourself to certain restraints that correspond with your nature, that correspond with reality. And so this is one of the things that is so, it's both one of the things that you asked the question about what is one of the most common objections. I would say one of the biggest objections, it's not a stated objection. It's this like felt objection. It's people they're like, this thing, it can't actually be as good as it says it is. It just sounds too good to be true. It's digital stuff can be hacked. There's like, it's like this, I don't know what, that people actually feel. There's things that come out of their mouth, but then behind that is this more general, vague, they don't even know what the objection is. And so one of the things that I think is helpful, because it just seems so ephemeral, the whole Bitcoin thing and digital currency, it seems so ephemeral. But you mentioned the energy piece. And for me, I think that really does kind of bring it down and connect it to reality, where there's only two ways to get Bitcoin. You either sacrifice real world money, time, energy, real world energy in the world. You pay for that in order to operate and use a Bitcoin mining computer, or you buy Bitcoin from somebody who's already done that process.
What about the North Korean Strategic Reserve?
Yeah, okay.
That's another way.
Yeah, that's true. You could also steal, all right? There's two legitimate ethical ways to do it. Thank you for the clarification. But yeah, I do think that's one of these things where Bitcoin is really tied to real-world energy. It actually requires real-world energy in order to operate. And so by virtue of that fact, it's now operating by the same rules that governs everything else in the world. The Christian way to put this, in Christian parlance, would be sowing and reaping. This was a big part of my journey with Bitcoin. So I'm studying Bitcoin for like 6 months. I'm also pastoring this small church. I'm doing sermon prep. I'm in the book of Galatians, and I read Paul say, God is not mocked, for what a man sows, that will he also reap. And so we have all new believers in our church, or mostly new believers. And I was like, all right, how do I rephrase this in a way that makes sense? And my thing that I came up with was, okay, so God has so hardwired the universe to operate according to this principle of sowing and reaping that to deny it is to mock him. And so I said, okay, that's one thing to articulate that, but that's a strong phrase. That's a strong thing to say. So what are some examples of this? If I'm going to have to give an account of this or defend this to someone, what does this look like? And so the first thing that came to mind was the Thessalonians, where the Thessalonians believe that Jesus is coming back, and some of them go, okay, so then we don't have to work. Like, great. And Paul goes, no, if you're not willing to work, then neither should you eat. Sowing and reaping. The point of food is to give you energy to serve God and serve others. And if you're not willing to steward it to that end, then you shouldn't eat. And if you don't do that for long enough, you die. So this is a big part of life, is stewarding this principle of sowing and reaping, recognizing it, submitting yourself to it. You could also go to biblical sexuality. God has an order for these things. He says you sow getting married, and then you reap childbearing and enjoying sex. And you can go all the way down the line. The big one, crescendo for me, was, I'm like, it would be great because I had this sensation or this feeling in my head that it'd be really powerful if this somehow culminated in Jesus. And then it does, right? Because within Christianity, it's different than Islam, where in Islam, Allah can just, papally declare your sins are forgiven. They don't have there doesn't need to be a sacrifice for sins. And so within Christianity, the soul that sins must die. Sin requires a cost. And so there are fixed inputs and fixed outputs. There's sowing and reaping as it relates to sin. And so with Jesus comes and he dies on the cross to pay for the real world sin cost. He doesn't try to shortcut this system in the way that Islam does and some other things do. And so seeing all these things, I then came back to fiat currency. And I started thinking about fiat currency through this same lens. And I just realized fiat currency denies sowing and reaping. It basically gives governments and central banks the ability to reap where they haven't sown and just create money out of thin air with no energy component attached to this. You can take the same digital dollar that has a 1 on it, and you can take the same digital representation of a dollar and put 100 on it. And even though they took the same amount of effort to create, one could be worth 100 times more than another. So that's another component where I think I've heard Christians, that it's a helpful thing to realize it's not just random and ephemeral and just all tied in a pump and dump scheme of
So I think there's a lot of people conflate crypto and Bitcoin and
correct,
all that. Yeah. As a software developer, I would argue that Satoshi could not have vibe coded Bitcoin. Okay.
AI, it just wasn't available then. But have you seen the new 4.0?
Okay, so Moses couldn't vibe code the 10 Commandments. Okay, when he broke those tablets, he had to go back to the source.
That's right.
Okay, first of all. So I would argue that altcoins are just sort of the AI slop version of crypto.
Yep.
Right. And so
vibe currency.
First of all, when Satoshi coded up Bitcoin, of course, it was built on the shoulders of giants and 40 years of hash cash and the whole thing, right? But now what you see is people just launch a token. In the 2017 days, it was on Ethereum, and now it's all in Solana, and they just sort of copy some code and vibe it up, and then launch their token, pump and dump, and those networks have no value because. Obviously, it's not just the code, but it's the network itself and all the people, right? You can't fake that. So I think that's just, it's every level, turtles all the way down. You can look at the token, you can look at the network, you can look at the code itself, you can look at everything that led up to it. There's no vibe version of that. It's legit. So
And again,
that's really good. Here's just a new thought that has been formulated. I'm going to throw it out there, and you guys critique it, improve it. Okay, and it won't be no more vibe coding, little jabs. We have some inside jokes here we've been working on this weekend. But so think about deconstruction. Within the Bitcoin process, the Bitcoin rabbit hole, there's an element of deconstruction of what we believed, and it gets undone, and you're like, well, actually, this assumption is not true. And recently in the church, people talk about deconstruction, right? And I don't know, like statistic-wise, is it a growing phenomenon? But it's certainly gotten more prevalence that people, well-known Christians, deconstruct, and they're rethinking the things that they have been taught, the things that they relied on. Maybe they were taught as kids and they took for granted. And what I find interesting is that the Bitcoin deconstruction process, I have heard again and again, lead to a faith discovery process. Whereas, so this, like, here you have this faith deconstruction process. That is this whole movement. That's real. That's going on. And I've never heard of someone deconstructing their worldview through Bitcoin and then saying, wow, well, now I can't trust the Bible anymore either. And then deconstructing their faith. No, it's the deconstruction of normism is inverse to the new life building of a Christian biblical worldview. And do you guys agree? Have you guys seen that? And have you heard of anyone like getting into Bitcoin?
For the Christian that's already a Christian, then gets into Bitcoin, it only goes one direction, like it strengthens their
faith. And then for the non-Christian that gets into Bitcoin, it leads them towards faith. I have never heard of the Christian that deconstructs through Bitcoin and then also deconstructs their faith.
I might know one, but but his name is Andrew something. He was popular, but yeah, I don't know the exact timing, but at least he came public with it after that. So, but again, the broad principle could still conceptually stand.
Yeah.
You read the New Testament, letters of Paul, he's constantly facing this objection that what he is saying is shocking and radical, because what you're saying is that people can be accepted by God without having to perform to get there. If what you're saying is true, people are going to live like hell.
Yeah.
This can't be real.
Romans.
This is so opposite of everything we thought was true. You know, to go back to your principle of the law, and the law it only demands, it can't ultimately save you. But there's a lot of people running around in the first century butting heads with Paul and with Jesus who said, look, we're keeping the law. We're reaping what we sow. God's going to reward us. Because look at all this sowing we're doing. Look how great we're doing with all the performance we're doing.
Did we not?
And Jesus comes and Paul comes and they blow the whole thing up. And people can't believe it. Is there a danger with Bitcoin that you become so focused on sowing and reaping, on consequences, on the way the world works and the way natural law works, that there's almost this kind of performance mindset or like a prosperity gospel mindset of, I just do these things and then God will fix things for me or God will accept me. How is Christianity different than that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're going to try to if you're going to try to do this comparison, there'd be a number of ways. Well, first of all, the first thing you would say is, I mean, what is the purpose for which money serves? Why does money exist? Right? Because again, if you can take anything and orient it around yourself and you ruin it. Like you completely take away the spiritual design for which God gives us all of life as a gift. All of life is grace. And so if you take it's perfectly, normal, or like we see this everywhere where people take good gifts and then, twist them, orient them around ourselves or something other than God and serving other people, and it breaks them. So yeah, if you take this, again, I would argue, I don't think it's arguable, but Bitcoin is a gift. It's this good tool, okay? But all tools are only created once you've already identified a problem that you're trying to solve. So the question is, what is the problem that Bitcoin exists to solve? And how can we avoid making Bitcoin and looking at it as like an end in of itself, whether you go like deep off the deep end of like Bitcoin is God, or it just sucks up so much of your time and excitement and whatever that you neglect, the other things that God has given us to do. Money is a very influential thing and a very important thing in terms of how it structures society and how it allows us to, interact with each other in equitable and just ways. But there is a currency that is more important and more central to God's work. There's a tool that's more central to God's work than money itself. That would be part of the way I would answer.
And I would argue that there is a layer of degeneracy within the Bitcoin social layer and the people and the industries that are there. And some of it is related to the volatility and the monetization process of Bitcoin. So there's the whole Lambo world, there's the get rich quick, there's the like huge like margin 100x leverage trading, there's the YOLO type of mentality.
Is that really Bitcoin, or is it becoming more crypto?
So here's the thing. So there's the crypto community, and the maxis will want to totally separate it. But you still have human hearts within both groups. And you can still observe the like life cycle of the Bitcoin influencer. The quintessential Bitcoin influencer who maybe he gets into altcoins and little things, and then he's like, no, I'm a maxi. And then he goes podcasting and he does his thing, and then he gets referral links and he starts getting sponsors, and then he blows up, and then you know what? Bitcoin bear market. I got to pay the bills. So there's got to be some. So then
and he's shilling built on Bitcoin.
You start shilling other things. And you're like, the whole like, hey, you're secretly getting sponsored to pump this thing. Even if it's not another token, it might still be a product or service. And social media is a part of it. So it's all mixed in. The social layer is mixed in with X and the algorithms and the conferences and the conference podcast kind of ring, and who's paying who and who's cool enough to hang out with who.
To be clear, we're not getting paid by anybody. So.
No. But so within all of that, there's a lot of brokenness. And honestly, if you're trying to get your satisfaction by making it in the Bitcoin space, and riding your scooter around for a few years during the bear market, so you can be the next like OG, like you know you're going to find yourself disappointed, and you might find in yourself that you actually can't keep your toxic ideals that you think you have, or that you. I think a lot of guys, and I hear some insiders say this, like, oh yeah, these guys publicly they're all maxing it out, but behind the scenes they're total like degens. And it's like, and you have these like, dude, who wants to live like this divided, like online life and then your private life, and you have your anon thing here. And
so, greed is no respecter of persons would be.
Right. We were Ash and I were just talking yesterday about Bitcoin tends to focus on how it fixes these kind of outward issues and sins. We would call them sins of the flesh, gluttony, greed, lust, drunkenness. I'm going to clean up kind of the outside of my life. And it's like, that's a good thing to do, and you should do that. But that in the Christian way of thinking, those are problems and those are serious sins, but they're actually not as bad as spiritual sins. Things like pride. Things like being condescending and looking down on people. I said one time to Jim, I said, we're working in Bitcoin and we're working in kind of how it intersects with Christianity. Dealing with money is already spiritually dangerous enough. And dealing in God and Christianity and religion in its own way is also very spiritually dangerous because of this great temptation to wear the mask and to be a Pharisee and to perform. And so then you combine these things of, it's not just that I'm talking about money, which is dangerous. It's not just that I'm talking about God, which is also dangerous in its own way. But now they've kind of hit each other. How do you guys resist the many spiritual temptations, even if you have outwardly dealt with, the sins of the flesh? How do you resist, and how do you help Christian Bitcoiners resist these incredible spiritual dangers and deceptions that come with dealing with money and all these problems?
This is the best question I've ever been asked. Like I think like this is hard. Like it really is hard. I mean, I would say I do struggle with this. Like this is something that, because again, you're working so hard, especially like in our case, like we're working, you guys are too, but like you're trying to help Christians understand the consequences of this, because like in our case, these currencies collapse and ministries go under and they don't recover. Like this is something that really happens. And so it's easy to focus on that. And then, I'm late to dinner. I'm late to dinner because I'm focusing on this thing, and I realize, oh shoot, yeah, my kids are out there, and so like I do think it is this constant thing of just you get to the point where you realize you're like, oh gosh, I'm too far this way, and you repent, like, Lord, please forgive me, ask forgiveness, and then, or I'm too far over here, like, Lord, please forgive me, like, help me, and but yeah, it is. I don't hear very many people talk about that, but it is hard, right? And especially, and then you get to the point where, again, you're in, even if you're in it for the right reasons, right? Again, to your point, you can get in it for the right reasons. You've got Bitcoin. You're not buying these other things, but you're sitting there. You start to covet. You're like, you get a day where the price drops and you don't have any money, and you're trying to plan out and budget, and you're like, oh my gosh. And so it can just be this thing where it can dominate your thought life, to a degree that isn't healthy at all. So
I would take that not even one step further, like not even just the things that you don't buy, but even your own, where you spend your time and your own productivity, right?
Yeah.
There's this idea that Bitcoin's this black hole.
Yep.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It sucks everything in.
Yep.
So there's a temptation as a business owner to just redirect all capital that you would otherwise reinvest into your company to just put it into Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we see mining companies doing this now, right? They're like building strategic Bitcoin reserves, and everybody wants to be the next MicroStrategy or strategy, whatever they're called.
Yep.
But then also on the church side, right?
Yep.
Like we're just trying to get people over the hump to adopt Bitcoin in the churches, but then we don't want to swing the needle so far the other direction that then the churches just become these hardcore hodler mentality, and then all the funding dries up for kingdom projects now. Like, how do you avoid that? Like, what
I think
happens?
Again, just remembering to what end these things exist. Like we were talking yesterday about trying to help churches, with a plan for what are we going to do with Bitcoin that we receive, right? And so, like, remembering, okay, so if we're going to get this, having something where, all right, we're going to hold this for 5 years and then we'll sell. Like, remember, or if we have a building project or something like that, then we'll sell when this time comes. Like, remembering that, again, asking yourself this question of why does money exist? Like, the what is money question is one thing, but then why does money exist? And it exists for to serve for the glory of God and the good of people everywhere. And so just keeping, keeping vision of that, and then a vision of yourself as a steward versus like a God.
Yeah.
Like, this is the real thing.
We're not going to be here for forever.
Correct.
Time preference can't converge to zero asymptotically, right? Like,
correct.
We have to at some point use this for something.
Yep.
I mean, I admit I feel a little bit guilty myself, right? Even just as an entrepreneur, putting more resources into Bitcoin versus investing further into companies.
Mm-hmm.
Should I feel guilty?
So I think, right, there's dangers at every turn.
Mm-hmm.
In the prayer, give me not poverty nor riches. Right? I don't want to forget you in my wealth and prosperity, and Lord, I don't want to like steal and in my poverty and dishonor you. And I think it's an illusion to say, well, there's some happy medium of like the perfect net worth where you don't steal, but you're not so rich, you become like those people, right? I think there's a place of heart to be. There is a reality. There's the edge cases of, yes, there is a type of poverty that leads to and promotes sin. Because of that need for survival. And there's a type of wealth where Jesus says, hey, this makes it a lot harder to get into heaven, guys, if you have this significant amount of wealth. Okay, what does that look like? I think it's harder for different reasons for different types of people. But there are different challenges for wealth. So I think just to touch on at least a couple of them, I think one is the idol of security. So we can talk about how, okay, well, Bitcoin promotes more biblical ethics and a long time horizon, or like you would say, a short time preference, a low time preference. I don't care about when I spend it. I'm going to have a generational view of my wealth and my investment. Well, that can lead away from consumption and the blowing and the wasting of YOLOing. But it can also create a kind of squirreling away of an idol of security. I know I'm safe enough. I know nothing will go wrong now because I've built this fortress, this citadel of Bitcoin. I have my insurance policies. I have my multi-sig, right? I am anti-fragile in all of my kind of how I've set up my life.
Right. It's the parable of the rich fool.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Now, that's it. And you're still like living really simply, and people look at you and no one knows how much wealth you have, and you're an OG in Bitcoin, but no one knows. And you live frugally, and you can boast about that even, right? It's a part of your pride.
But like the Peter Schiffs of the world will say, but you're denying society. You're not reinvesting. You're not creating any goods or services for society and making things grow. So you got all your savings, but good for you, Mr. Selfish.
So I would agree with that. So I would agree with that in principle, and I think it's interesting, like question to ask around like the Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, and the question about whether savings is good for an economy. Well, he says it is, because in savings you're going to invest at least in something. Right? There is still wealth creation. You're not just removing money from distribution. In Bitcoin, you actually are, right? So I would say I'd love to think about that more and discuss it. But I think the dangers of squirreling away wealth are less significant than the just wasting it all. But it's still there, and that's where the kingdom question has to be, not if I will invest it for eternity and for the good of civilization, but when. And we need to put that there.
Well, I think there's just this coming kind of backlash, right, of the people that have been out there working really hard, and they're having everything stolen from them through fiat, and then they're on hard times, and all the Bitcoiners are just, number one up. And so they're all out on their yachts and driving their Lambos and stuff. Yeah. Having been perceived as not trying to help be the solution, create wealth going forward, right? And so it's like, we need to get out in front of that and be like, no, actually, we've been giving it all along to the kingdom, right? This is what we're doing.
Correct. Yeah, I think the other thing that's really important, all right, is so because you asked, like, what was the exact question you asked?
So
investing in my business versus
so like redirecting, instead of like reinvesting in the business, redirecting the profits to Bitcoin. Should I feel guilty about that? So in imagine somebody comes to you, and they ask you, or imagine you have the question. You're like, all right, Lord, how do I respond to a fool? Okay, and you're flipping. You go to Proverbs, and all right, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. And you're like, sweet, shut the book. You're like, that's it. And then as you're closing the Bible, you look at the very next verse. Don't answer a fool according to his folly, lest, what is it? I can't remember what it is, lest something else happen. So,
lest he become wise in his own eyes or something like that.
Yeah, something like this.
It's literally the same exact thing.
It's the same
the
framing.
first part of the sentence is the opposite.
Exactly. So what do you do with that? What this means is, the reason why this says this is because there's multiple types of fools. And so some fools need to be answered like this. Other fools need to be answered like this. Now, the reason this matters is because what that means is that sometimes what denotes faithfulness is going to be exactly the opposite of what faithfulness would require in another situation. And so, again, largely speaking, there's in all things being equal, all things being equal, investing in your business is a totally good and rational thing to do. But that doesn't mean there's not situations that would come along that would require you to do the exact opposite of what normal prudence and faithfulness would require. And so, again, especially when it's a time-bound thing, you're not doing this for 50 years. You're looking at least based on our conversation, like you're talking, hey, this year, based on these things happening, based on Bitcoin's history, like it seems more prudent to do this right now. So, again, this is not some, fixed eternal principle you're talking. Like we're examining the.
I mean, also it's like in one case there's it's a for-profit enterprise on the one side, and then in the church it's like there's people that have needs, and we need to provide for them or something like that. So it's just apples to oranges. You know?
Yep.
You're not making a return off of running a soup kitchen.
Yes. Yeah. And so again, like you see the scriptures, like the earliest Christians, they go out immediately and then they sell everything and they give it to the poor or give it to the church and do these things. Okay,
Then a
great.
couple chapters later, it's like there's still rich Christians that are funding Paul's missionary journeys.
100%. And so again, to try to act like, and people go to this story of the rich young ruler, right? And they go and they're like, oh, Jesus said sell everything. It's like, okay, but the details matter. Why did Jesus tell him to sell everything? Because the rich young ruler said, I've already kept the law perfectly since my youth. So Jesus is telling him to sell everything, is trying to get this fool to see that you actually don't love God and your neighbor as much as you think you do.
Yeah, he was trying to vibe code his salvation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's trying to vibe code that thing. And so God was just trying to help him see, like Jesus is trying to help him. He's trying to pry open this guy's heart and allow him to see what he couldn't see. And so it's not like there's plenty of other rich people who neither Jesus or the apostles say, what's his name? Herod. Jesus doesn't, it's trial before Herod, you should sell everything and give to, he doesn't say that, and it's because Herod had other needs. Herod had other needs that
you're
address.
You're riffing on Proverbs, which is, one of these pieces of wisdom literature in the Bible. And this whole realm of how should you be generous? How much should you give? How much should you save? These are all wisdom questions, which means they're all a big giant gray area of how do you apply God's law in his world. Proverbs itself has warnings about money and about, hey, it's not going to last like you think it's going to. But then you also have kind of the dark side of wisdom in Ecclesiastes, which kind of has both warnings too, like you were saying, Ahshuwah, about it warns against the foolishness of living it up, crazy, degenerate.
Yep.
But Ecclesiastes also warns about somebody who has so diligently saved up all of his money, he gets to the end of his life and no one enjoys it, and he's miserable. He's eating in darkness his whole life. And so you have this kind of element of, you just need to figure out how to become wise.
Yeah.
But then Proverbs also says the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. Yeah. And, all questions around money and issues around money, even in the Bitcoin world, there's all kinds of fear about future and what about this and what about that.
Yep.
And you're game planning out all these situations. But, the Christian Bitcoiner, the Christian man who gives is operating ultimately by fearing God, the one who sees my heart all the time. He sees all my possessions. Everything's on the table with him. And it's ultimately for him. And so that's, I think, what can enable the New Testament then to be fairly loosey-goosey. It doesn't really ever quite specify exactly what Christian generosity should look like. It says, well, it should be generous, it should be costly, should be cheerful, probably in fellowship with other people. But it doesn't really give you hard and fast rules about it.
Yeah.
But it's all driven by this element of, well, do you fear the Lord? Are you living for him and in humility before him? But we're all so quick. We want kind of hard and fast rules.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do?
And interestingly, too, you have the C.S. Lewis quote where, ironically, the people who most need to hear the one side often focus on the other. It's like C.S. Lewis talks about the guy in the boat who he's like bailing out one side of the boat when really he's going under on the other side. And so I think that's a big part of this too, is you have people who they want to focus on, the generosity part, and they do it to a fault to where they can't provide for their family. Like where God says, if you don't provide for your own family, you're worse than a Gentile. You're worse than a non-believer. And so then you have other people who are on the other side who they need. So it's like one of these ironic things where you obviously you want to lay yourself bare before the Lord, but then you also, because again, there's people who are harder on themselves. There's people for whom having any savings feels like a compromise, and so talking to your other spiritual authorities in your life might be helpful and needed in this regard to kind of again navigate this loosey-goosey, what can feel like inexact and difficult to figure out what to do.
So, Jim, I've thought a little bit more about your question.
Which one? Should I feel guilty? Should I feel guilty?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel very, very, very guilty.
Okay. Say like 20 Hail Marys or
that's right.
20
our vibe coders.
So I would argue that it would be bad stewardship to invest back into your business if you've done the math and the return on that investment, and then you compare it to the compound annual growth of Bitcoin and the trajectory that it's at, and you understand. So like within value investing, you invest in the value of the business or the asset and not the market price of it and the market opinion at any given moment. If you've done the hard work to understand the value of Bitcoin and the value of your business and the return on investment of your money spent for your business, you look at the two numbers. And if the Bitcoin number is higher, then that's the direction of good stewardship. And the only other thing I would add to that, and this is, I work in like a more ministry, nonprofit space, but what we realized is simply adding like a seasoning period to our donations or our savings and investments that we have before it's spent can 10x the impact. So if I have a donation and I know I don't need to spend it right away, or it's funds within an endowment, it doesn't need to go out the door this year. It's going to sit somewhere. If I put it in Bitcoin and I say, hey, we have a vision and we're going to have a significant impact. In 5 years, we're going to do this thing that we believe God's calling us to, and it's a big dream, but we're gonna shoot for it. And I put my funds into Bitcoin. Right? Tomorrow is never promised, and God rebukes the man who says, I'm going to go and do business in this town tomorrow. So let us be humble, but let us say, Lord willing, this money invested in Bitcoin set aside for these 5 years will allow us to have this God-sized vision. And at least so far, that has shown itself to be fruitful in our ministry. And I think it's something worth ministries really looking at I think we're all just so conditioned to the fiat matrix that 5 years even feels like an eternity.
Yeah.
I think everything ultimately gets diminishing returns. I don't think we're in diminishing returns right now in Bitcoin. I think we're so early.
Yeah.
So it just, when your time horizon is like, oh, I'm making decisions on a quarterly basis or even a couple year basis, and you're seeing diminishing returns like on your business or something like that, and then we're living this strange period at the beginning of Bitcoin's adoption. I mean, barring Jesus coming back, Bitcoin could be around for thousands of years, right? And we're just like right at the very beginning of that, at the exponential sort of part of the S curve. So you have to zoom out, because it's like, I'm going to great, go start a business. I guess for me, what it's done is it's forced me to be honest about my own enterprises as an entrepreneur. And in the past, it was very easy to just sort of ignore diminishing returns because you're like, well, I'm really excited about this project and I've got customers and they want more features and I'm a software developer, so I like writing code and maybe not vibe coding it, but so I want to keep doing that. But now we have sort of like a metric that we can measure all the enterprises by. And it kind of reflects back on you and said, if I keep doing this because of these other reasons, it is in a sense bad stewardship.
Well, and think about this, so God has. We talked about sowing and reaping. So I think it's one of the most fruitful things to think about. A lot of things through this. I mean, spiritual things. God just presents spiritual things through the lens of sowing and reaping all the time. But is it good stewardship to sow seeds in the winter? No. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like God has an order for the sowing. He's like structured the world to operate that there's a time for everything. There's a time to do this. There's a time to do this. There's a time to do this. And so like what you're looking at is you're trying to, because again your end goal. This is the other thing is your end goal is not just to accumulate Lambo wealth. Like your goal in building your business is not to accumulate Lambo wealth. You're trying to leverage this thing for again the good of your employees and for the glory of God and so that more and more people will be able to know the kingdom. And obviously, even those things can be done in unspiritual ways. You can have good motivations, at least superficially, and that something different can be the internal reality. But again, I think that I just think it's I've seen it over and over again in my own life and the lives of other people that. I mean, you see the wicked try to weaponize the consciences of the righteous. Like you see this. And so this is why you have many examples in the scriptures. Like, so the Hebrew midwives, they deceive Pharaoh. They do not tell the truth. Now, why? Like, is it because they feared they were trying to save their own lives? No, because they wanted to save the lives of innocent children. And this was wicked, what they were being asked to do. And so, again, the question is, what is the thing that determines what makes something right or wrong? Okay, whatever is done of faith, okay, whatever is not of faith is sin. And then God has given us a two-pronged way to determine if this is right or wrong. Are you doing it for, the great commandment, the love of God and the good of other people? Like this is the thing, is this, rather than us always framing this as the negative, oh, should I not do this? What should I not do? It's like, what is the propulsive thing, the thing that we actually want and are moving towards? That and you do need the negative framing, but like you definitely want to make sure that there's something you're going towards and not just something you're afraid of moving away from,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it may not always be like Bitcoin accumulation to the exclusion of everything
else. Correct, yeah.
Okay, but so this is something I've been wanting to talk about with you for a while.
Oh, okay.
So Michael Saylor is sort of the quintessential example of Bitcoin accumulation to the exclusion of everything else. And it appears that he may be turning into the fool at the end of Ecclesiastes that has all the money, and his solution is to just burn it. Mm-hmm. He calls it a pro rata distribution.
Mm-hmm. So burn the keys. Explain this. There's probably some people listening to this who don't understand.
And we're not talking about strategies Bitcoin. We're talking about Michael Saylor's personal Bitcoin stash that presumably he has the keys to.
Yep.
So if those keys are destroyed, then because of Bitcoin's design, nobody can ever access any of that Bitcoin ever again. And so it's effectively gone. And so there's not really 21 million Bitcoin anymore. It's 21 million minus whatever Michael Saylor has. Yes. So that's the new denominator.
Yes.
His rationale for this is he can't figure out a better way to leave his inheritance to somebody, or a more just way than just doing it as what he calls a pro rata distribution to all the Bitcoin owners at that time that haven't destroyed their keys.
Yeah.
So is this good or bad, or somewhere in between? How should Christians look at that? How should we think about it?
Okay, so we did talk about this. I don't think it's one of these things where this is like the worst thing ever that he could do. For me, this is, so there's...
What's the worst thing ever?
I mean, using it to fund child abuse or something,
Okay.
I don't know. But like, so it's more the question. So there's two types of sins. There's sins of omission and there's sins of commission. Okay. So sins of commission are doing things you shouldn't do. And then sins of omission are leaving undone good that you ought to do. And so when I think about Michael Saylor, like you're talking tens of trillions of dollars. If we're going to try to denominate in dollars, like I don't know how long we're going to continue to do that. But for right now, let's just say tens of trillions of dollars at today's value or whatever that this one person could potentially have. And at the same time, because of the nature of Bitcoin and the nature of adoption, there's going to be billions of people who accumulate almost no Bitcoin in their lifetime. And so to take purchasing power that could theoretically feed half the world, and then just get rid of it in the name of some arbitrary way of blessing people who are already wealthy, who are already having a meaningful amount of Bitcoin. Like to me, it just doesn't make any sense.
Okay, let's dig into that. Yeah, so are you saying it's actually destroying the purchasing power? Like he has a grain silo and he literally lights it on fire and nobody can eat that grain anymore? Or are you agreeing with his characterization that it's a pro rata distribution?
Again, I'm the term like pro rata. Like I'd have to dig into like the actual. But I guess my thing is, if
effectively handing the money to other people, even though the Bitcoins themselves are being destroyed.
Yeah,
it's like he's handing Bitcoin to other people.
It's anti-money printing. It's the idea. If money printing is taxation, if creating more currency devalues the currency in everyone's pocket, then the inverse is true.
Yeah.
Taking away money out of circulation increases the value of the money in everyone's pocket. That's the
it's not
theory.
Destroying the actual total pie of purchasing power. It's just shifting it to different people.
Yeah. So here's my objection to this. Okay. So this is kind of like would you characterize that as like an inverse socialism? Like he's giving a gift to every single person. If you want to accept his framing, he's giving something like an amount to every single person on the earth equally to some degree.
Well, it's proportional to how much Bitcoin they have.
And he's supporting the network. He's a gift to the network.
You're saying now this Bitcoin is not going to be sold or something?
Well, he's taking it out of circulation.
Well, what's interesting, if every Bitcoiner did that though, Bitcoin would die.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Or because you just have the Satoshi wallet left and no one can spend
which
that
is
one.
you can't
theoretically
use it.
also destroyed. So
Yeah.
obviously Bitcoin, people can't burn all of their Bitcoin. If all the Bitcoin got burned, then it would have no value.
And I think that's a good principle for ethics. If everyone did the thing you're doing, would we all be better off or worse off? And if the answer is worse off, then maybe it's not the best thing to do.
Okay.
So the other side of this would be so again, what this is operating under the assumption that we are to love and treat all people the same. And to some degree, like this is the implicit assumption. I want to
Bitcoiners and no coiners.
Sure, I want to help everybody. Okay, but that's not that. Okay, and there is some level of truth to that. There's also some level of truth where Jesus says, if you don't care for the members of your own household, you're worse than an unbeliever. Right. So who else owns Bitcoin? China. All these guys. So by him doing this, he's effectively giving more purchasing power along with us. He's giving more purchasing power to wicked people who also hold Bitcoin. Why would you do that?
So he could, rather than just generally just reducing supply and benefiting the whole network, he could make moral decisions about where should value and wealth
he could.
Is there a moral imperative to do that?
So I would say God's law is the moral imperative that every human being is subject to.
Tim said yes.
Why?
Tim, unpack. Go ahead.
Well, as far as we know, he's not a believer.
Yeah.
But he has God's law written on his heart.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to be a Christian to put two and two together, that resources are limited and there are far more needs than there are resources to meet them. There always will be way more needs than resources.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some people who need it more. And if, Bitcoin continues to do what it's done, Bitcoiners will be the wealthiest people in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there are going to be a lot of people who, like you said, have not figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
And
so he'd be contributing to even more wealth inequality in that sense.
Yeah.
I think so. And even, it's just not everybody will need it to the same extent. And I think it's this basic ethical principle that's not even really a Christian principle. It's just the way that the world works and the way that God has wired us, that you meet the worst needs and the most desperate needs first.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just say, well, I don't know. I'm going to kind of shrug my shoulders at it all.
Yeah.
It sounds really good and altruistic though.
Right.
At the surface level, right? Like I'm going to give it all away,
I mean, there's a lot of, couple more. I'll do a little devil's Saylor's advocate and then another kind of critique it. But compare it to the Bill Gates and like the Founders Fund, kind of these big philanthropy commitments. I'm going to give away all my wealth. But then you step back and be like, well, how much harm has the Gates Foundation wrecked on this planet?
Yeah.
And
and the tax games that they're playing. This is not actually.
And how much evil is actually hidden behind the supposed philanthropy and generosity of the ultra wealthy?
The Gates one too. I mean, he was just trying to not let Melinda get it, right? So.
But I mean, the fact that people abuse their generosity doesn't mean, therefore, I don't have to ask hard questions about what is the best way to be generous.
So I think there are good ways. There's ways to set up foundations. There's ways to have trust. There's ways to think through long-term, generational giving that can actually go in the right directions and could support the Bitcoin network for generations without just burning your coin. So that's one is okay, yes, you don't want to do the normal just philanthropy, but there are good ways to do it, I think. The other issue that I see is it's just, honestly, it's sad. It kind of breaks my heart to think that here's this dude, and as far as we know, he's not married. As far as we know, he doesn't have kids. And it's God has put his image in us. And when we are fruitful and multiply, we put our image into other little image bearers of God called children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And as far as we know, this guy doesn't have any little image bearers of God that he has helped bring into this world and who is he's responsible to provide for and care for them. And so when he thinks about the next generation, there's nothing there. all he sees is the Bitcoin network, which from listening to some of his sermons, that's his heaven and his God, and so it is sad. I feel like it's a very, as Jonathan Edwards would talk about love, right, and charity being how large-hearted is your vision of love? Is it like God is eternal and fills all things, and so the fullest-hearted love is to envelops God and all of God's purposes in creation. It's just so small-hearted and small-visioned to just say, I want all my life's wealth and value to support Bitcoin.
I would say even if it's well-intentioned, because like I could honestly believe that it's well-intentioned. I'd be saying with Paul at the end of Corinthians 12, but there's a better way. Like there's a way to better bless the world. And again, you see this within Paul even. Paul said, he talks about going to meet Peter and he compares notes on the gospel. Peter hears him out and is like, okay, yeah, like you got the real deal from Jesus. And he says, only he told us to remember the poor. The very thing that he was focused on, the very thing that Paul himself already wanted to do. And so like this idea of, again, the idea of burning these keys, it's going to disproportionately benefit wealthy people. Whereas if you give this Bitcoin to trusted charities and things like that, you're going to disproportionately benefit the poor. And so I just think like it could be, it's like a zealousness on my part. I'm like, I want to see you like go down like as potentially the most generous person who's ever lived, outside of a spiritual context. Because this is another thing, right? Like the wealthiest people in the world, I like the instinct of what he's trying to do, because the wealthiest person who's ever lived is God, and God gives. And like one of the marks of the wealthy is that they give. You saw like Rockefeller during the Great Depression. He's over there giving money out. He's handing out dimes to poor people. And so all these things. So I like the instinct, but I just don't think based on, I just don't think this is actually accomplishing what he actually seems to be wanting to do. So I wouldn't want to scream at him or yell at him. I just want to say, hey, I think there's a better way. There's a better way to accomplish this goal that you seemingly have. To bless and blow the minds of so many people and help them in ways that, we can't even fathom, us, plebs.
Yeah. I just want to make it clear.
Yeah.
I really like Michael Saylor.
Yes, 100%.
If Michael ends up watching this, watch it. Daddy will. Been inspired, super intelligent.
Yeah.
Brilliance Labs will take your money when you die.
But like all Bitcoiners, he has an enormous amount of influence.
Yes.
And so whatever he does kind of sets the trend. And I think it's really easy to look up to it and say, yeah, that's so noble and altruistic. And I do think there's a better way. Yep. And I think that it's incumbent upon us as Christians to show that way. Yep. It's like you guys are going to be the next generation of Bitcoin OGs.
Yep.
And here's how you need to think about it as generational wealth. And like when you zoom out and you actually do have that low time preference and you're thinking about things in terms of decades and centuries and you're having large families and building communities like that, it's just, you can't just hit the easy button. There is no easy button, There's no way to vibe code your way out of the generational wealth.
Yes. And again, this gets a lot to your earlier point. It's
just too easy.
This is a lot clearer. And again, there's going to be people listening to this who are in a different situation. You do have kids. And again, there's people, like we were talking, like there's people who feel like they don't know how to think about inheritance and how to like think about like think of all the damage that could be done if you give. And like there's truth to that. But there is this sense, and to kind of making the same point, like where, a godly man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And so one of the ways in which you can image God to your children is by giving them wealth. And so like you see, the other example we talked about in our conversation about this earlier was the prodigal sons, like this story where, I guarantee you every single one of us at this table, if not for the scriptural account of the story, where the wretched younger son goes to his dad and says, hey, I want my part of the inheritance right now, which is basically saying, I wish you were dead so I could have your money now. We would rebuke and like want to have a serious conversation with the father who actually goes along and gives him it. We're like, think of the harm you're doing to the soul of your son. Like, do you hate your son that you would do this? And yet that character is the stand-in for God, like in the story. And so I do think, again, it's easy to have like knee-jerk reactions and intuitions, to trust our intuitions on these things. But one of the things that God gives us reason to challenge intuitions. In Romans 1, Paul, he calls sinful humanity. He says he accuses them of being like unreasoning animals. And so this is one of the things that with reason, we've been given this reason by God. It's what separates us from animals. And so reason allows us to challenge our intuition and challenge our initial assumptions and things that seem obvious initially. And so I just would want, I'd want people to.
Grace is truly radical and something that you could not invent on your own. It's something that's shocking and offensive to the world, and it should raise all kinds of objections from all kinds of very well-meaning religious people, like it did with Jesus and with Paul. And like we would say with a lot of Protestant theology, that grace restores nature. But because grace is what it is, and it is so shocking and explosive and invasive, I think there is a way in which it does change you in a way, and it causes you to live in a way that looks very wasteful and strange to the world. And I think Christian Bitcoiners, in their generosity and in the way they operate with their Bitcoin, to other Bitcoiners watching them, they may look, almost be offensive. They almost be radical with what they're doing and wasteful. And what are you doing? You're not living according to sowing and reaping. These people don't deserve it. Or, you're burning generational wealth opportunities by doing this. And so, you can overdo it, of course. But I do think Christians should probably usually err on the side of generosity and on the side of doing things that do cost me, and even my family. At some level, you can make a lot of excuses to be very selfish and say, "Well, I'm doing it for my family, or I'm doing it to be safe or secure, or whatever it is."
Yeah, I do. I absolutely think that's exactly, again, that's the thing, is there's risks everywhere, and this is why, again, you could just talk about this one issue. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Like, you're literally walking through, there's dangers all around. There's always dangers and, hellish dangers that are threatening us, threatening others. And so you're sitting here, we have to rely on the Lord. We can't just, again, it's not a law where we just go, all right, we flip the page, whatever. No, it's like, it's not just, we're not just a religion of the book. Like, we are a religion, it's the book with the Spirit. Like, we need to rely on the Holy Spirit. And if we see clear instruction from the book, that's a blessing. Like, praise the Lord. He gave us the book for a reason. But there's also a part of this where there is less clarity, like God wants us to rely on him, and he loves to answer prayer, and he loves to give us wisdom when we, in a way that the world thinks is foolish, when we just come to him and we ask him for help. Or again, we ask other wise people. We look for wise counselors. In an abundance of counselors, there's safety. So I think all of these things, are good places to go to try to figure out how to faithfully, steward these different things.
Let's talk about the rubber meeting the road for a second. Ahshuwah, you had an idea for a microgrant project. So this is something we've been kind of running a beta test on almost at the moment. You want to tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. So as we've tried to help churches and Christian ministries and different orgs take Bitcoin donations, save it, use it for cross-border payments, just become familiar with it, get it less scary, less unknown. There's just a number of hurdles, right? There's the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. There's just questions. There's just the incentive problems that they have. It hasn't been enough for most groups or churches. There just hasn't been enough reason for them to take that first step. And when you actually take the first step, you realize that wasn't that hard. Wow, that was actually easy. And look, we got some donations, and this has served us really well. But from the outside, it just looks scary, right, and unknown. So how do we create enough of an incentive to say, hey, take that first step? We promise the water's nice. Come in and join us. And so Brilliance Labs gives grants. We give grants locally to support churches and ministries. We're with a Bitcoin training program that we're doing. We're starting to give Bitcoin grants globally and exploring that. And so we just had this idea of using matching grants to help incentivize the setting up of a Bitcoin like exchange account or wallet, notifying your donors that you're going to accept Bitcoin, and then to begin to save it. So the end goal was, let's have a church or ministry experience receiving a Bitcoin donation and then holding it for an extended amount of time. In this case, we're starting small. We're going for like 9 months. But just to experience holding it, seeing it appreciate, and being like, wow, it worked. It's not the end of the world, or it really benefited us. And having worked within the nonprofit world, I know there's a lot of like T's that have to get crossed and I's to dot, and there's like, you have to do your homework well. And to go through the process. There's giving policies, there's investment policies, there's tax questions. You have your CFO, and you have a board. You have to run it through the board. Proposals, votes. If it's a church or a denomination, you got to make an overture, whatever that is, and get all the ministers to vote on it. So there's processes, and there's bureaucracy, for better or worse, right? So what if you have people that understand Bitcoin and understand the nonprofit world and the Christian ministry church world? What if we do a Trojan horse of a grant? That's a promise.
Benevolent Trojan horse.
Sorry.
Okay.
Not to burn down your church.
A carrot. I mean a carrot. Wait, is that not better?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, an incentive to say, hey, we'll give you this matching grant if you do the homework, and which is even more valuable than the grant, we will give you the education resources and the coaching as you walk through those steps to get you set up. And so that was the theory, right? Let's give a matching grant. And I think the other hack that we tapped into, that my hypothesis is that it'll work. We'll still see, but it's slowly coming around, is that our main audience isn't the churches and ministries that don't know anything about Bitcoin. Our main audience are the Christian Bitcoiners that have a church or ministry that they care about and already donate to. So that's the audience. And so that's what we put it all over Bitcoin Christian Twitter and told everyone, hey, nominate your favorite church or ministry. And here's the clincher. You need to be willing to give the first donation in your Bitcoin. So put your money where your mouth is. If you're not willing to put Bitcoin towards this church or ministry, then don't even call us. If you're willing to give some of your Bitcoin, we will match it up to a certain amount, and then we will encourage them to hold it for at least 9 months. So in our just kind of creative masterminding, brainstorming, we think we've aligned the incentives. And we're running through the process. And you guys can speak to it. You've talked to, done a lot more of the hands-on stuff. How are churches and ministries responding?
Well, I think when you get really into Bitcoin and you're like, oh, the scales have fallen off. I've learned all these things. I can see all these big questions about money. Usually people that are into Bitcoin tend to be already kind of into computers and technology, and they tend to be in economics. And it's really easy to forget that all this stuff is really foreign to almost everybody else out there.
You can't vibe code it. You really have to do the hard work.
Like, I think it's so helpful to just like, hey, I'll hold your hand a little bit and help you see that this really is not that painful. And like, you don't have to be Mr. Economics Master. You don't have to be Mr. Ron Paul. You don't have to be Mr. Libertarian. It's just like, hey, look, there's some really cool services now that make this very simple and very easy. And it's like, oh, okay. You just need a little bit of help. And I think having somebody, like, if you just go to a random church and you're like, hey, you should accept Bitcoin. They're like, what? I don't care. What is that? But if you have somebody already there who says, hey, I have this thing called Bitcoin and I want to give it to you, or I want to give it to you and I'd like you to hang on to it for a few years. Ministries, oh, that's interesting. Okay. Like, tell me more about that. So I think it's been fun working with them. I think it's a slow uphill process because and I think some Bitcoiners can be impatient and they can, we're going to hyper Bitcoinize. Everyone's going to be on this in like
super
1
cycle.
month. Right. But it's like, it's hard and it's slow, and churches and nonprofits and missions agencies, they have so many other fish to fry. And we would agree that the fish they're frying, many of them are much more important, spiritually speaking and eternally speaking, than Bitcoin. And so it's a crash course in patience and in love and in gentleness, because you want the church to benefit from this as much as they can.
So just to reiterate, our audience is the Christian Bitcoiner. We're all doing this together. if this is interesting to you, Mr. Christian Bitcoiner, please reach out to either Thank God for Bitcoin, Brilliance Labs, or Magnalia. We'd love to talk to you and help you through that. One final thing. We're recording this in April of 2025. The Bitcoin conference is next month in Las Vegas. Do you want to show your barbecue for a second?
Yeah, so we're going to do, so TGFB, we've been doing like one big conference a year. We do usually a 2-day event. We invite, again, people from all over different kinds of fields, whether pastors, economists, we had farmers, we had just all kinds of people who are Christians. And we can, again, talk about, from a Christian standpoint, like what are things that are important? Like how should Christians think about investing? How should Christians think about things like, health and nutrition and all these things that impact, our own abilities to be faithful Christians and fathers and husbands, and then, to be able to work to provide for people all around the world. And so, again, we do those kind of things. And so this year with the Bitcoin conference, we reached out to a bunch of our core TGFB people, core Christian Bitcoin people, and they just weren't crazy about the prospect of doing an event in Las Vegas. So, again, people have histories and, they're not real crazy about that. So I was like, okay, that makes sense. So rather than do a big event and try to get a whole bunch of Christians there, it's super expensive to do large events there, to rent out a venue as well. So that was another thing that actually made me happy. The Globe. Yeah, we were going to rent the Globe, whatever. But no, we just decided to do a smaller event. It's going to be a lunch, a barbecue and networking event. We're going to renting a big Airbnb and just going to do that. So it's going to be about a 4-hour event. We're inviting a bunch of our friends who work in the Bitcoin industry, who are well known, and again, some of the best Bitcoiners in the world. Some of them who've become Christians in the not too recent past. So we're doing that. You can find out more information on our Twitter account. You can buy your tickets. There's only 100 tickets available. We've already sold like a quarter of them. So go out and grab them quickly if you're interested. So
awesome.
Yeah.
And you guys also did just release The Gospel According to Bitcoin. So I'm going to shill you a little bit on that one.
Yep.
Definitely go buy the book and read the book. It's great.
Okay.
You and I are going to do a one-on-one
Yep.
follow-up podcast to this to dig into that book. And then Tim and Ahshuwah are going to do a one-on-one. Tim's going to dig in a little bit on Bitcoin for Missions with Ahshuwah.
Love it.
So please stay tuned. Thank you guys for coming. This is great.
Yep. Appreciate you guys.
That's awesome. Thanks, guys.